Are we good to start?
Now you are able to start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Policy Committee today, October 14th, 2020. We're going to start with the first item on the agenda, which is the minutes review. The minutes were circulated. Do we have a motion to approve?
Move.
Thank you, Dr. Beckel. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm sorry, Mr. Giacalone. And all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? Hearing none, that carries. So now we'll move on to the rule review update and the rule review memo attachments from September 30th. I think is where we'll start.
Okay, so this is just for your information. We do have a couple of updates since September 30th. We did file a couple sets of rules with CSI. The Chapter 11 controlled substance rules, which would include the weight loss rules, were filed with CSI, and the rules for the Chapter 8 rules were also filed with CSI as well. So they're in their comment period at this point, and I'll be able to bring those to you probably in November to let you know what the comments were. And that's all I have on that particular piece.
Thank you. So let's move on to rules to file with CSI, starting with the hearing rules and exposure of prone invasive procedure rules.
Okay. So those rules were circulated for initial comment, and we did receive a couple of comments. We received a comment on the hearing rules internally to make a change that's helpful for board management, extending the days for a request to address. The board still has the authority to grant a late one, but I would recommend making that request just because of how the timelines fall. It makes it easier for having the board materials. And then in the exposure-prone invasive procedures, we had a comment from the Respiratory Care Society about refining the types of procedures that respiratory care professionals use. And I think that was a really good comment, because not everything that that a respiratory care professional does would fall into that exposure-prone invasive procedures. So it just refines that information and clarifies which are the exposure-prone invasive procedures. So I'd recommend taking that change as well. And then if you approve those with the changes, then we can file that with CSI.
Is there a motion to approve?
I would like to move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
I see. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that carries.
Great.
We'll move on to the next one.
Thanks. So the next one is the licensure rule, 4731-614. So this is the one that allows for some additional discretion in your license eligibility. So in the testing sequences, it's for physicians only, and MDs and DOs. And we did circulate it for comment, and I've shared the comments that we received. And, I guess I would characterize them as, raising some concerns about, making this particular change. We also had two individuals want to know why the board wanted to make the change. So we did provide them with the minutes from the policy committee meeting in, I believe, November of 2019 when we had talked about this. So I do want to bring those comments to your attention and have discussion on that.
Yes, Dr. Schottenstein.
Thank you so much. So, what's interesting about this proposed rule is I'm not actually sure that the language addresses the concern we originally had regarding the Dr. Vargas matter. So we'll recall that Dr. Vargas was an otherwise well-qualified doctor who had scored, I want to say like 35 years ago, a 74 on the flex, and 75 was the score that was passing. So he was applying for licensure in Ohio. He seemed eminently qualified, and we were in a bit of a position, right? Because unlike equivalency language that we have for licensure applications, it's different when you have a score on a test. And so we did, wave him through. But at the same time, we thought, gosh, is there some language that we could come up with that would give us some flexibility, sort of like we have with the licensure applicants? And so that leads us to this current language. And what's interesting about this language is that it's phrased in such a way as to say any other exam. So if we're talking about any other exam, I'm not sure that we would have been in a better position to address the Dr. Vargas matter, even if we'd had this language at the time, because the issue wasn't, the exam itself. It wasn't that we didn't consider flex as a legitimate exam, it's that he didn't pass it. And so, I'm very respectful of, the hard work that has gone into drafting this and circulating it and everything, but I thought I probably should just at least, raise my thoughts on the matter and see what everybody else has to say about it. Thank you.
Do you have a suggestion on a way to improve it at this moment?
And so forgive me, you addressing that to me or to Kim?
Oh, I'm sorry. How about to you, I guess? And then,
Sure.
Yeah.
So, it's a hard situation, given the fact that it's a score on a test. So, potentially, I suppose we could say, that we require passing scores on our, exams that are indicated for licensure, barring extenuating circumstances or, something along those lines. I'm just not sure about this language. I'm not sure because it's so vague, right? It doesn't really specify another test. I'm not sure what that other test would be. So I'm certainly grateful, Kim, if you have any thoughts on the matter about it.
So I believe that we did feel like that language would address the issue because it gives such discretion to the board. I do, and I don't know if Joe is on, and if he has comments, he may have some comments as well from licensure. There is, and I see he's unmuting himself. So I don't know if Joe has some comments, but we did feel like that it did address the issue.
I believe in Vargas's case, it was actually the exam because in 4731-614 B5, the issue was that he didn't end up passing a single 3-day flex. So he took a single 3-day flex originally, didn't pass, and then whatever state he was coming from allowed him to retake just a certain part of it. So the second time he did this, it was not a single 3-day flex. So had he been able to use the sequence that the other state allowed him to, he would have had the 75, and he would have been eligible in our rules. So it wasn't just that he didn't have the right score. He actually did have the right score, but it wasn't a 3-day exam as the rule requires.
Right. So he had taken, I want to say it was like 2 parts out of the 3 when he sat for it again and then got a passing score on the.
Yeah, he either reached one or two parts of it. I don't recall the facts, but when he redid it, he did not retake he did not take a single 3-day flex.
Yeah. So, my thought is if if everybody feels like this addresses what we want it to, I'm certainly, glad for that and support it. But just wanted to air that out.
Now, I did think about this a little more. I do want to, it is, I will agree, it's pretty, kind of broad language. The comments sort of definitely, speak to that. I don't think this was is intending to open up doors to say, you took some sort of foreign exam, you took some medical exam in, Pakistan or whatever, where a lot of people come from, or India. I don't know if that was really the intent here. I don't know if we want to limit it a little more, maybe, maybe a U.S. licensing examination. We already have a rule for Canada. So I don't know if you want to just narrow that a little more, or you might get requests from people wanting to use a medical exam maybe from another country to fulfill this requirement.
So shall we maybe table it and think that through a little bit more?
I think so.
Michael, can I ask a question?
Yes.
It's usually they have the best recollection on this case, because I don't. Is this the one with the individual that Spanish background? And he was, it was more his experience than the exam that really drove it, wasn't it? Because he had worked,
So
it was more his experience than the exam that really drove our decision in that one, I thought.
Yeah, his experience had an awful lot to do with it. He had taken the flex, I want to say it was like 35 years ago or something like that. And since then, in that time, he had, just had a very, distinguished, ethical kind of a career. I think we were all impressed with him, and all of us, I think, certainly speaking for myself, felt badly about, this thought of having to hold him to the letter of the law. And so we did ultimately wave him through for that reason.
Right. So I'm wondering if maybe focusing on the exam in terms of the language may not have been the appropriate road for this. Maybe it's based upon, accumulation of experience, something along that line, and, is probably what we're driving at, right? Is the totality of the individual's experiences and expertise is probably more in line with what we got in past, as opposed to in missing a point or a different exam. Because I think you're right. We start opening up exams, we're looking at a plethora of who knows what exams. I'm just wondering if we could look at it more as the totality of the person's experience, expertise, blah, 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 or something along that line. Maybe it's the language to focus on. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, Kim, I have
just make sure you don't violate the statute. The statute requires certain things to be met, and you can't waive certain things. You can't waive education requirements. You can't waive training requirements.
I'm not saying waive it, but can we add that on as, something in addition to, again, I know what you're saying, Joe, the statute, but I'm just wondering, that wasn't the defining moment that pushed the guy across the line for us. I mean, the point wasn't that. It was the totality of the individual's experience.
And I think Dr. Safran has a comment. Prior to your comment, Dr. Safran, Kim, can you remind me, what was that pathway forward for conceded eminence? How does that work again?
So that is, and Joe may have more details on this. I'm going way back in my memory. But that is someone who doesn't meet the licensure eligibility requirements, but they have work in a particular field. They do have certain requirements like journal articles and things that have been published. I believe they're limiting their practice like to a particular hospital, I think. I would also say that, there are some legislative proposals around, reciprocity that may resolve this issue without having to do a rule. So, and you'll get some more information on that in the legislative piece today. That's a possibility too, to hold up for a little bit on this rule and see what happens with the legislation. That's an option. I think we do run the risk of having other applications that are similar to Dr. Vargas, that would need to come in front of the board, and you don't have a way to address it.
Okay. I think that, it sounds like we're going to be moving in the direction of I'm going to be asking for a motion to table this. But before that, I do want to hear from Dr. Safran and Dr. Bechtel, who had their hands raised. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Safran first and then go to Dr. Bechtel.
Well, in many of the licensure issues, we've been using the verbiage of equivalency. And maybe that can be added to this, which will give us the liberty to evaluate their career, what their skills, their time that they've been in practice for an equivalent to an exam or whatever. So that verbiage has been used across licensure, and I think it could be added here.
Okay. And Dr. Bechtel?
Yes, I was just going to comment further on the licensure through conceded eminence. That's generally a foreign physician with very outstanding credentials, a major researcher who would not meet the regular licensure requirements in Ohio, but has an exceptional record of research or clinical skills in a foreign country and associates with one academic center. His work is limited to an academic institution, and the dean of that academic institution has the oversight of that individual. I'm just going to explain that further. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. That is incredibly helpful. Yes, Dr. Schottenstein.
Thank you. And thanks to Dr. Safran for that thought. The equivalency language, again, it's something that, would solve our issue. I have a recollection, though, Kim, I think I brought that up before and was told because it's a test and it's a score, that it's harder to craft language like that.
Mm-hmm. I think we did have some issues with that, but I think we can go back and take a look. I think really the struggle we're having is where do you set a floor on eligibility? It's eligibility, and I think that's a bit of how do you allow yourself sufficient discretion, but still have a clear limit on eligibility. So I think that's the issue.
And I also think that the statute also requires applicants to have passed an examination prescribed in rules. So you can't just say, you've got all this great experience and everything, we're just basically going to waive it's the same as having an examination that works for us. You've got to pass an examination pursuant to the statute.
Correct. I think that, and it could be a slippery slope, and I'm sure we don't want any unforced errors. And so I'm going to ask someone for a motion to table. But before I do that, to Joe and Kim, if I heard all the comments correctly, I'd like to table this. But there are basically 4 pathways that we discussed that might need some additional work, depending on what happens in the legislature, of course. But one is the concept that Dr. Safran brought up about equivalency. If there's a way we can craft language around that in line with the statute, that's good for us. The second is regarding foreign tests. I mean, obviously, we have no way to police or understand what happens in different countries. So we want to make sure that we put a box around that to ensure that we're okay. The third is to make sure that we protect or have a mechanism, if possible, for cases like Dr. Vargas or similar cases like that, where it could be advantageous for us if there is some middle ground we could find. And then the fourth is, we got to just monitor the legislature, because if things happen and decisions are made for us, it makes this whole exercise not necessarily needed. So those are sort of the 4 expectations we have as a board that we've expressed in this conference. So is there a motion to table?
I move to table.
Thank you. And is there a second?
Second, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Hearing none, we'll move on to the radiologist assistant rules.
Okay, thank you so much. In April of 2020, we had circulated proposed amendments to the radiologist assistant rules, and they were circulated to interested parties and no comments were received. In preparing the filing, so the policy committee approved filing with the Common Sense Initiative. In preparing the filing, it was discovered that we needed to make some modifications to the amendments in order to align the rules with the statutes. So I'm bringing it back to you. But I believe that we could have approval to file as amended with CSI, because there will be a 2-week comment period with CSI. If the policy committee is in agreement, because we hadn't received any comments on initial circulation, I don't know that we need to send it back out for initial circulation when we'll have a circulation period at CSI. So that's one thing to think about. For the first rule, we have no changes. These are definitions and miscellaneous provisions. But for 4774 1-02, we're amending it to align with licensure rules for other license types, and certain deleted sections have been put back in. And then rule 4774 1-03, which is dealing with the renewal of the license, was previously proposed to be rescinded, but in re-reviewing 4774.11 Ohio Revised Code, we are putting it back in to include the standards and procedures for issuing and renewing licenses, and including the application fees for initial license and renewal. So we're proposing that that be rescinded. So the radiologist assistant rules are different from your other license types in that they set the fees via rule rather than statute. So so the statute requires us to do that. So so at this time, I would like to ask for a motion to file with CSI with those amendments.
Is there a motion to file as amended? Thank you, Dr. Bechtel. Is there a second? Dr. Giacalone? I'm sorry, Mr. Giacalone. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the consult on 5123-2606, Department of Developmental Disabilities.
Dr. Soin, members of the committee, we received this rule from the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. There's quite a few rules that have been promulgated that need the medical board to sign off on, and this is one of them. This is a rule that will approve them to do some of their education virtually. It doesn't change the curriculum at all. And it still requires the skills testing and verification to be done in person. And I did put this in your material for today. And the Department of Developmental Disabilities have asked us for a motion to approve so they can get this filed.
Is there a motion to approve? Or first of all, any comments or discussion? Okay, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And I think Dr. Johnson may have seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none. We'll move on to the legislative update. And before I turn it over, I just want to say that the legislative tracker is something that we've all been working on. You know, Chelsea, myself, Stephanie, we hear your feedback loud and clear. And every month we're trying to improve on that. From last month to this month, one of the key things was just making sure that we've delineated a board position. And you can see that in the document, whether it's interested party or support. But this time we really went out on a limb on some of the stuff. So you'll see some that are like strongly opposed, for example. We're really sort of asserting our opinion of what we think would be representative of the best interest of the board. And as we go through the legislative update, again, if you guys have any more formative feedback, please let us know. I will say that Chelsea and Stephanie have really expanded and improved the scope of how we're tracking bills to a level that I've never seen since I've been on the board. So kudos to you both. And I will turn it over to you guys for the legislative update.
Well, good morning, and thank you for allowing me to provide the legislative update before the committee. The past month has been very busy for the policy team, even though the legislature has been sort of quiet. We have definitely made some strides on several pieces of legislation with bill sponsors and other interested parties. So I'll just go down the list. You know, if you're following along on the memo, these are in numerical order by bill number. So I just have an update on the ones that we are, monitoring very closely. On Senate Bill 246, which is the occupational licensing reciprocity bill, I mentioned that there was a sub-bill last month. That sub-bill is still awaiting adoption in the Senate committee, and no committee meeting is currently scheduled. The sub-bill did address some of the original concerns that we had brought to the sponsors, but did not include all of our requested amendments in their entirety. So we have gone back to the bill sponsor and requested that our original amendments be added, especially around fitness to practice. And we definitely are continuing to advocate for an unlimited historic look-back period. Senate Bill 364 was introduced on September 16th and would require Ohio to join the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. The policy team has met with the executive director of the IMLC, several member states, and we briefly discussed the issue with the OSMA. It's important to note that compact legislation cannot be amended. It has to be adopted as written. Next week, we are meeting with interested parties. The bill sponsor is hosting an interested party meeting, and we will be attending that. And we intend to provide a more comprehensive presentation of this issue at the next policy committee meeting. House Bill 263 is the other occupational licensing bill that we continue to monitor. This bill requires the board to provide the comprehensive list of criminal offenses that would prevent someone from becoming licensed in Ohio. Since the last board meeting, we have been in contact with the bill sponsor as well as the governor's office to address our concerns. We also continue to monitor House Bill 492, which was the physician assistant bill, which would expand their ability to perform procedural sedation and for the purpose of rapid intubation. We have sent that. I had provided a memo of our opposition to this bill, and most of you saw it. But it also went to the bill sponsor as well as the governor's office and the PA Association. House Bill 679, our telehealth bill, also continues to progress through the legislature. I'm happy to report that we have submitted our amendment package to the chair and the vice chair of the Senate Insurance Committee, where that bill was assigned. Both members, we met with both of those members, and they seemed receptive to our request. They did not give us official confirmation that the amendment would be added to the bill, but they, like I said, they did seem, understanding of what we were asking and seemed receptive to that request. And they did request that we send over any feedback that we received from stakeholders. Several other bills were added to the legislative tracker since the last meeting. Just a side note here, Senate Bill 238 would place the licensing of music therapists under the purview of the medical board. And House Bill 580 is another bill that seeks to expand telemedicine. Both of these bills are in the process of being analyzed by the policy and legal teams, and we should have more information for you at the next meeting if we believe these bills are going to be moving forward. And then finally, just a note on House Bill 203, which was the mobile dental services bill that had the language around pharmacy consult agreements. There were quite a few questions at the last committee meeting, and so I put together a memo outlining the changes to the pharmacy consult agreement piece. And that memo is included in your board meeting materials, and it also was sent out as an email. So that's there for reference if you would like to take a look at that. And that concludes my update, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chelsea.
Yes, Dr. Bechtel.
Yes, I appreciated your memo about the consultation agreements between mid providers and the pharmacists. It's not clear to me what degree of training the pharmacists have to allow them to have the expertise in prescribing opioids. Do they go through like a CME course? Is there a well-defined course by the Board of Pharmacy that allows them to do that?
That's a good question. That's something that the bill doesn't address, and so that's something that I can look into and get some more information for you.
One of the big concerns I have is that when you're prescribing opioids, pharmacists obviously know a lot about the drugs and drug interactions, But we're dealing with patients that may have comorbidities. They may have COPD, may have hypertension. They may have other medical conditions that put them at risk of overdoses or complications. And at the same time, we have them consulting with nurse practitioners and PAs that, again, haven't gone to medical school. And I'm a little bit concerned about physician oversight of all this. They're allowed to draw labs, but they can't make a diagnosis. And I still have worries about the results of those labs and will the physicians have access to them in a timely fashion. I just worry about the comorbidities of patients and a consult agreement between a pharmacist and a mid-level provider, and how we can be assured that there's physician oversight, that they're overseeing what's going on, and also how confident we can be that the physicians will get lab results, and how those lab results will be acted on, how we can be assured as a board that physicians are getting these results, and again, the level of training the pharmacists have and prescribing opioids, because again, comorbidities are important. Now, patients with COPD, heart failure, you may know a lot about drugs, but you got to know a lot about comorbidities too. And those are just concerns I have.
Sure. And, I think there's opportunity there for the medical board has the opportunity to create rules around this. So we, that's something that we can consider in the rules. And it looked like Nate had something to say.
I'm not sure that this comprehensively covers all of our concerns, because obviously, as you put it, these mid-level practitioners have not completed medical school, but in subsection C of the statute, it talks about before entering into a consult agreement, all the following conditions must be met. And I believe C2 is the diagnosis for which each patient has been prescribed drug therapy must be within the scope of the practitioner's practice. And then C3, to answer your question on the pharmacy training and experience part, is each pharmacist must have training and experience related to the particular diagnosis for which drug therapy is to be prescribed. So the statute does touch on that. I think Chelsea makes a good point that certainly there's some ability to also help allay some concerns within rule as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think one more point to build on what Dr. Bechtel said, before I get to you, Ms. Montgomery, I saw you raise your hand, about physician oversight. But the other thing that he mentioned in passing was more almost like a liability piece. Like, what if a test is ordered and a physician has no access to it? I would hate, because ultimately physicians are responsible for these things. I would hate to see a physician get drug into either a medical board complaint or a malpractice complaint when they didn't order a test, don't have access to it, and say something happened from some peripheral decision maker. So as we're looking at rules, that might be something to consider, a way to, whether it's hold harmless or shared liability, or just ensure that physicians have access or are given all the information on tests that are ordered. A thought. And I will go to Ms. Montgomery and then Mr. Giacalone after that.
Chelsea, well done to both of you. Well done, Shara and Chelsea, on this. I just wanted to go back to the Senate Bill 246 and the House Bill 263 with regard to look back, and particularly you said you're going back to them in Senate Bill 246. Awaiting the sub-bill, etc. Can we at least get language that says we can look back for certain kind of violent behavior, violent crimes of violence or sexual crimes, so that we are not limited. We are blind, so we're not completely blind in taking a look at some of this licensing questions. Have they been, have they just said no?
No, and actually Senate Bill 263 allows unlimited look back for offenses of violent or sexual nature. 246 does not address that, and that's something that we could certainly ask the sponsors to consider.
We should mimic that, I think. if you mentioned it, I missed it. House Bill 482 decouples the national accreditation from licensure. I learned a little bit about Pink Slip from Dr. Schottenstein and all that. Is that moving, and have we been able to, where are we on that bill?
Is that the PA bill? I think you said
House Bill 482, I think it is.
Okay. So yeah, that's the PA bill. It's realistically, it doesn't seem like it will have enough time to get it all the way through the legislative process. It has not had a first hearing yet.
Oh, okay. Right.
So we are, anything can happen. And I think that this lame duck is expected to be pretty crazy. So we're certainly, making sure that we are watching it with hawk eyes here, and we'll, make sure that it doesn't move without us knowing.
And, okay, because they could slip it in, amendments in, so.
And that's definitely something we're watching for on this one in particular.
Okay, thank you.
So now, Mr. Giacalone.
Yeah, just a question. Nate's gone. My only question was with the consult agreement for the pharmacist. Isn't it a trickle down effect? And isn't the physician ultimately the one who drives what the relationship is? I mean, that individual drives the relationship with the PA, who drives the relationship with the pharmacist. If the physician doesn't want anything, tests, whatever, can't that be set out? I mean, isn't that part of the situation, or is it free reign to the physician's assistant?
And I'll let Nate speak to this if you'd like, but that's my understanding. This is all within the constraints of the physician consult agreement with the PA or the nurse, and the consult agreement with the pharmacist is just an extension of that. And I don't know if you have anything to add, Nate.
Yeah, I think Mr. Giacalone makes a really good point, that I think that that the agreement itself can put some guardrails around that. So I think, I think the issue is, and what people have highlighted in our previous discussion, is just sort of the amount of different sort of partnerships and agreements that are going on at one time, and keeping track of it all. But yes, your point is well taken, that the agreement itself could provide some control and guardrails around it.
If a physician doesn't want opioids, they just say don't want opioids. If I want to limit it to anticoagulants, we say we want to limit it to anticoagulants. I mean, I feel like there has to be some accountability. You're the top of the pyramid. If you don't want it to happen, then don't let it happen. But if there's some value downstream, then you can choose. It seems like we're looking at this like it's rampant. Oh my God, there pharmacists out there asking for MRIs and this and that. That's not going to happen. Okay, and it shouldn't happen. And unfortunately, if you're going to delegate, there's a responsibility that comes with delegation. You can't just say, "Well, I was asleep at the wheel." It doesn't work that way. So I think you'd have to take accountability. If you don't like it, it doesn't happen. It's a simple process. So I feel like we're thinking about all these dire scenarios. Again, to me, that starts to look like it's turf protection here. If you don't want it, you can stop it. But when we just say no, slam it, shut it down, that looks like some of the things that the New York Dental Board got accused of, railroading, and I don't think we want to be there. Another question, there's one provision in here, one statute in here that talks about, I'm switching topics now, House Bill 747, prescribing dispensing drugs for off-label use. Elsie, what's the story on that one?
That one, 747, you said?
Sorry.
Yeah, the very last one on the tracker. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. That one has not seen much movement, and I'll be quite frank, we haven't, I have not delved into it as deeply. I don't know if the legal team has anything to add on this one, but it hasn't seen much movement. I can get more information for you.
I just found it curious. I mean, isn't that a given already? What's the purpose of that?
And I agree with Mr. Giacaloni's point, because we do it all the time, right? I mean, aspirin's not FDA approved for acute MI, but it's almost standard of care, right? I mean, and I don't think we really take action on it. So I kind of wondered the same thing as Mr. Giacaloni there.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what's the ulterior motive here, because there must be some rationale.
Yeah. So
Yeah, like I said,
Chelsea,
sorry.
this is the one that was introduced the day after hydroxychloroquine issue happened with pharmacy. So this was in response to that, and we haven't seen any movement on it since that day that it was introduced. So I think given the follow-up
that is great. That is great insight, actually. I think that's probably exactly the impetus.
Okay, then we'll just keep an eye on it, because if it continues to move, then I'm going to be wondering what's the backstory on this now.
I do want to make another comment to the first thing that Mr. Giacaloni said, and I want to say I actually really agree with his rationale and his point of view. Essentially, ultimately, if a physician is delegating, I suppose they do assume some responsibility for that, and that's a really good point. That you don't have to do it if you don't want to, and I thought that his arguments were really articulate and generally important. So I just wanted to make that noted.
I agree.
Dr. Schottenstein.
Hi, I just had one quick question about the Senate Bill 238, license and regulate art and music therapists. Ohio has a psychology board, and so I guess I'm just curious if you happen to hear or find out a thought as to why the idea was to have us license these therapists as opposed to the psychology board. I would just be interested.
I am not entirely sure why they chose our board over the psychology board. I did, in the testimony, they at the committee hearings, they expressed that there there are all of these benefits to music therapy and in conjunction with medical therapies. So I think that they thought that maybe because these two things go hand in hand, it would be best suited for our board. I don't have a better answer than that. I apologize.
No worries. It's fine. I'm not opposed to it. I just was curious.
Chelsea, where do the art therapists go under this one?
They
split.
Yes, it was split, and they would go under the occupational licensing. The board it's several. They have several functions in one. The name is escaping me right now, but it's like the occupational licensing, athletic trainers, and that board. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Quick follow-up question on the music therapist. What are the chances of this getting through?
It has had its second hearing. I mean, it would have to move pretty quickly to get through, but I don't think we're counting anything out during this lame duck. I think that things are going to be moving rapidly, and it's at this point, like I said, it only needs one more hearing to be passed out onto the Senate floor. So it could go, but we're not. I don't know that we're sure whether or not this will go or not.
Yeah, I guess I just wondered, is this the right place for this group? No offense, but I mean, I'm struggling with this. I mean, we have so many other pivotal licensees. I just do not see the music therapist, no offense to the music therapist, being one that we should be wasting resources, not wasting, but utilizing resources on. This seems better, I think, situated in another board, and maybe we need to push for that to not get this, because we're already strapped for resources. Really, is this the group we want to add to the group? I don't know. I don't think so, but maybe I'm a minority on that.
Mr. Giacaloni, I think you raised a really good question. My understanding is we've seen this bill before. I think maybe Chelsea and I can do some history digging on this one and see what kind of conversations. And now that the art therapist is a piece of this, are they better coupled together? I think we can have some conversations with some other boards to see. I think one of the differences for us with this group, if I'm remembering, just stretch, the way the legislation is worded, We also have some licensing concerns with this one, just because it's a very different licensure process than what we currently do. And there might be boards that are more similarly situated, just even from a licensing. I think there's a national exam, I think. And it just might render itself better to boards that process licenses in that way.
Thank you. That's great feedback again. Thank you. Any other comments? My final question for you, Chelsea, is those two medical marijuana bills, autism spectrum and opioid use disorder. Can you provide a brief update?
Yeah, so those have not, they're something that I don't necessarily think that we expect to move. They have not seen much movement, and it's not apparent that they're going to see any movement.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other comments, and if that concludes your report, we can move on to pharmacy board update.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the pharmacy board update.
Well done, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Montgomery. And I wholeheartedly agree. Excellent. Thank you. Pharmacy board update.
I think we may not have any items there. So I think we've probably covered those in our legislative discussion. But I think that was a placeholder. But I do not think we have anything for that today.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, if that's the case, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
And all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Well, thank you all for a great meeting.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Yep. See you.